We are going to have our Bible reading now, and we're in John chapter 13 and verses 1 to 17. That's on page 956 in the church Bibles. Sam doesn't know this, I don't think, but we've been preaching through John, and we actually have just finished our little mini-series in John at the end of chapter 12. So it's very fitting that he's chosen chapter 13 and the first part of that chapter. So John chapter 13, verses 1 to 17 on page 956. Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now, when it was time for supper, the devil had already put into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. So he got up from supper, laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel, and tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who asked him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I'm doing you don't realize now, but afterward you will understand." "You will never wash my feet," Peter said. Jesus replied, "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." "One who has bathed," Jesus told him, "doesn't need to wash anything except his feet, but he is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you." For he knew who would betray him. This is why he said, "Not all of you are clean." When Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are speaking rightly, since this is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done for you. Truly I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master. A messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." Amen.
Well, I'm going to start this morning with a quote from somebody called Matthew. This is not Matthew from the Gospels, just to be clear on that. But he's on a US chat show where he says, "Imagine for a moment, at the beginning of your life, you were given a human, and you were told, you have one job for the rest of your life. You have to take care of this human." Most of us have not realized that that's our job, because we finish parenting where we were raised by someone else, and we go into the world and start looking for someone else to start looking out for us. But we are our human. The only person who's truly here to take care of me is me. He is in my custody. And when you wake up in the morning and say, "What would I do today if I were taking care of my human?" the answer is completely different to what we do most days when we beat up ourselves or put ourselves around toxic people or around people who don't treat us well. It's completely different. And what it makes us realize, and this is the big mistake, that loving ourselves isn't a feeling, it's an approach, a job. I wonder what your immediate thoughts are to that quote. What Matthew's saying there is something like that when we're given the responsibility of something else, we often do a decent job of it. And maybe you've been at the hospital before and you've heard the doctors say things like no smoking, and then you see loads of them outside all smoking. But we're generally good at looking after other things. And he's telling us that from day one, you are your human, and you need to act like it. It's your job. You have to do it, whether you like yourself or not. You need to look after yourself. If you're hungry, you feed yourself. If you're sad, you make yourself happy. You need to look after you, because you come first. Now, some parts of that don't sound outrageous. But sometimes, as often the case, if the world is lapping something up, we might want to be a little bit careful before taking a big sip. And I hope that by the end of this meeting, you are very glad that these are not the words that come out of Jesus' mouth, and that we'll be challenged but thankful for what does come out instead. And because I grew up in a Baptist church, we're going to look at the passage in 3 sections that all have the letter S in it. And so we're going to do that with verse 1 to 5 as the Lord who serves, verse 5 to 11 as the Lord who saves, and then finally the Lord who shows with verses 12 to 17. And there's just a few slight differences in my translation. I didn't realize there were 2 versions of the CSB, so that if I read something that's slightly different, I apologize for that. But let's start then with the Lord who serves, verses 1 to 5. It's helpful to remember as we start that we're moving into a chunk of 5 chapters, and we're just going to obviously touch on the start of it. It's great that you've done the previous 12 so recently, and I was glad to hear it when I was able to preach on this. But verse 1 gives us some context. It says, the Passover festival. So Jesus has prepared a room for what the gospel writer Matthew, not the person who said the quote at the start, reveals is just for 12 disciples. And why are they all gathered? Well, they're going to celebrate the Passover meal. It was a very normal thing for Jews today, and it's even more so normal 2,000 years ago. But what was that Passover festival? So Exodus 12 goes into a lot of detail for us on this, but verses 21 to 26 will just give us the clarity we need this morning as we move on. So if you want to turn to that, you can. Exodus 12, but I can read it out for you. So starting at verse 21, it says, Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go, select an animal from the flock, according to your families, and slaughter the Passover animal. Take a cluster of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and brush the lintel and the 2 doorposts with some of the blood in the basin. None of you may go out to the door of his house until morning, and when the Lord passes through to strike Egypt and sees the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, he will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter your house to strike you. So that's specifically the Passover. But why was Jesus doing it years and years later? Verse 24 onwards, it says, Keep this command permanently as a statute for you and your descendants. And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, you are to observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord. For he passed over the houses of Israelites in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians, and he spared our homes. So the Jews are saved from the last plague in Egypt because of the sacrificial lamb's blood that covers them. And it's during this Passover that Jesus is going to reveal that he is that final Passover lamb, that one and forever sacrifice that mankind need. He will die in place of mankind, that they will be free. And we will never celebrate Passover again, but as conveniently today, we're going to celebrate communion instead, where we look at Jesus' blood rather than the blood of the lambs. And whilst that's huge news for the Jewish world and for his disciples, in a few verses' time, it's clear that this is not new information to Jesus. So verse 1 of today's passage, before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from the world to the Father. He knew. He understands the timing and that his time on earth is coming to a close. And verse 3 makes it more significant. What does it say? That Jesus knew that the Father had given him everything into his hands, that he had come from God and that he was going back to God. So Jesus knows what's coming. And verse 2 and verse 11, well, it shows us it's going to be because one of his nearest are going to betray him. So he knows who he truly is. He knows where he's come from. He knows where he's going. He knows he has everything given to him and that he's about to be betrayed, not just betrayed, but to one of the most horrendous deaths that you could have. So what does he do with it? What would come next if you wrote that story about you? If you had all those things and you knew your betraying was about to happen, what would you do? Well, you might run away. You might leave the meal. You might, if you're more confrontational, stand up, say something to Judas. If you knew you had Jesus' power, you might even be tempted to zap him or something like that. Anything for self-preservation. But Jesus doesn't act like we'd expect or we'd write. Knowing all these things, verse 4, he gets up and takes literally a linen cloth ties it around himself, and washes his disciples' feet. Jesus serves. He is their Lord, with a lowercase l, but he is also the Lord, and yet he serves. He humiliates himself to serve his own. He strips down, takes a towel, degrades himself for the sake of others, and takes on that role of lowest servant. Having come from the highest place. Before creation, Jesus was with the Father, and he humbled himself to come in flesh, but now we see him go even lower. It was pointed out to me, we just cannot overstate this enough, that the sheer contrast of who Jesus truly is, and then what he chooses to do despite this. He chooses to serve his disciples by washing their feet. Now, washing feet 2,000 years ago was the lowest of the low job, and Jewish tradition points to the fact that even Jewish slaves weren't allowed to do it. It had to be Gentile slaves. It was too bad of a job for a Jewish slave that it had to be given to the Gentiles. And they are certainly not clean feet. And I wonder if I asked you all to take off one of your shoes now and pass it to the person next to you, and they had to take a good, strong whiff, how you'd feel about that. Now, as a guest speaker, it's a bit bold to do it, so I won't ask you to do it, but the point stands. You might be very grateful that you don't have to sniff each other's feet. You've been to bowling alleys, you know, that even with the spray they put in there, those things are still rotten. 2,000 years ago, the hygiene of Jerusalem, these are not clean feet. These are horrid. These would be atrocious. So if you know how dirty your feet can get, you can probably imagine then how bad it would be. But Jesus gets as low as you can and deals with the dirt of man. That is the man who's been given everything, who knows he's been given everything, the Son of God, but he gets as low as you can go, right in the face of man's filth. And that leads us on to our next point, the Lord who saves. So verses 6 to 11. Now, Jesus has served his disciples in this very obvious and hard to ignore manner. And if you're having anyone round for lunch this afternoon, I think you would notice if someone stripped off and started washing everyone's feet. So as we read this bit again, it's possible to have missed the bigger picture. If we'd done it in our Bible in a year plan or something like that, you skim over it very quickly. So let's just spend a bit of time looking closely at this, verse 6 to 11. But we'll start at verse 5, just to help that context. It says, "Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who asked him, 'Lord, are you going to wash my feet?' And Jesus answered him, 'What I am doing you don't understand now, but afterwards you will know.' 'You will never wash my feet, ever,' Peter said. Jesus replied, 'If I don't wash you, you have no part with me.' Simon Peter said to him, 'Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head.' 'One who has bathed,' Jesus told him, 'doesn't need to wash anything except his feet. He is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you.' For he knew who would betray him, and this is why he said, 'You are not all clean.'" So Peter's turn comes up, and in classic Peter form, he speaks up, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Now, how should we read that response to the situation? Just what is Peter's objection to it? Part of my job as a secondary school teacher is to teach values, which is kind of like PSHE or citizenship, whatever you had in your time, if it was even there. And one of the lessons we cover for lower school is about communication and about how we say things makes a huge difference. And we always get a few laughs when we teach the example, "I didn't steal your car." So we could say, "I didn't steal your car," which would suggest somebody else might have done it. Or perhaps, "I didn't steal your car, I borrowed it," or something like that. And we keep going, "I didn't steal your car." Well, it was your neighbor's car, wasn't it? Or lastly, "I didn't steal your car." Maybe it was your bike, or something else like that. So how we say things makes a big difference. And I wonder how you read Peter's statement, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Was it more, perhaps, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Is the act just too embarrassing? You are not allowed to see my feet. These things are horrid. This is disgusting. No one should do that. No one who matters anyway." Perhaps he says it as, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" "You don't need to wash my feet, mate. I'm sorted. I'm the rock you're going to build the church on. You're not going to do my feet, are you? It's not my feet. Maybe the disciples, you can carry on doing theirs, but not my feet. Or maybe it's perhaps just complete disbelief in the situation. Lord, are you going to wash my feet? He just cannot comprehend what's going on at all. Or finally, and this is actually how the grammar in the original puts it, a little bit more emphasis on it. It says, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? So the original grammar puts you and my together, which does point at it being a bit more of that contrast between Jesus and Peter, that he cannot grasp that his Lord and teacher is going to be this servant king. He might well understand Jesus' majesty, but he cannot compute what is about to happen. But it doesn't seem to stop Jesus, though, does it? When Jesus simply says, you'll understand later, Peter blurts out all the more passionately. What does he say? He says, you will never wash my feet, ever. And the literal translation comes out with forever. You will never wash my feet forever. He cannot fathom it. And if the situation was awkward before, the room must have felt the awkwardness now, as Peter has spoken out loud, and there's an awkward silence, no doubt. And did you notice that Peter forgot to say Lord this time? Every other time he addresses Jesus, it's Lord. It's very polite, but this time it just burst out, you will never wash my feet forever. Now, John's gospel doesn't have Peter being told, get behind me, Satan, by Jesus. So perhaps this feels like maybe this is his turn in John's gospel to get that rebuke. And is that how Jesus is going to deal with him? But in this moment, Jesus knows Peter is lost. And what might have sounded very pious in objecting to the situation, knowing how great Jesus is, turns out is actually opposed to the will of Jesus. What a dangerous place to find yourself. And I pray that none of us here would ever find ourselves rejecting Jesus' will under the ruse of humility or religion. Jesus knows that his understanding is lacking, that Peter's understanding is lacking. And he tells him clearly that afterwards he will understand. But after what? Maybe if there's a pantomime, you'd cry back, or if we were in America, maybe. But after is the cross. As the disciples will finally see and understand Jesus as that final Passover lamb on the cross, that sacrifice for mankind to be saved once and for all, he will understand then, but not yet. But Jesus doesn't leave him in complete ignorance, nor does he shy away from the difficult truth. What does he say in verse 8? If I don't wash you, you have no part with me. And now we see Jesus most clearly as the Lord, not only who serves, but who saves. Because Jesus can wash us clean. We must be washed by Jesus, otherwise we have no share with him. And that's a stark warning indeed, and one that Peter completely understands as he blurts out passionately once more, Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Now, whatever Peter did or didn't understand before, we have no doubt of his love of Jesus here. The very thought of no share with Jesus drives him to ask for even more washing than Jesus was offering. If he couldn't compute Jesus washing his feet, he certainly cannot compute not being washed or having any share with Jesus. And that's because Peter understands something that we need to, that we need to share with Jesus, and as such, we need to be washed by Jesus. And one of the reasons the quote from Matthew, the chat show quote, can sound so good at times is because we can relate to that voice in our head that tells us that it clearly doesn't love us, that often beats ourselves up and lets us do things that harm ourselves. And the Matthew fella's solution is just to love yourself anyway. It's your job, it's your obligation. Later in the interview he says you don't even have to like yourself, just love yourself anyway and it'll come later. But when we're really honest to ourselves, there's often plenty of truth in our negative self-talk, isn't there? We know we fall short all of the time. And it's just to our standards, never mind the perfect ones from a perfect God. And then making it worse, it's often our self-love that is the ugly part of us. We don't need to do what Matthew says and love ourselves more, because we are more than capable of loving ourselves. Perhaps it's the temptation to stay that little bit later at work, After all, there's always more work and it's a believable excuse. And you know staying late is that little bit easier than going home to the chaos. Maybe we see it in the micro decisions. Maybe it's just taking the best parking spot, the best chocolate from the selection box. These are all innocent enough, but we come first. And it's not just me, I hope, I guess, that wakes up and worries about me, myself, and I. Because my day has far too much time dwelling on me. And when something gets in the way of me and my plans, even my 2-year-old coming out of the house with no shoes on to get in the way of me putting the bikes away, which is no mean feat where we live, it just leads to a completely unfair berating. I snap at him because I'm tired. I've told him to stay in the house. I've told him he has no shoes on. I've told him if it's not yours, don't touch it, many times. But really I snap because my heart is in need of complete cleansing, daily, and probably more like hourly. The ancient Israelites, they needed a Passover lamb to cover them, to save them. We need a Passover lamb too. You and most certainly me need to be washed by the Passover lamb that is Jesus. Once for our salvation and repeatedly for our sanctification, as verse 10 points to. But when Jesus offers to wash us clean, we cannot show pride at it like Peter. We cannot turn away from this act of service and love from Jesus, because all of us here today and everyone there ever was need to be washed by Jesus. Because even if you are the nicest person in the world and you can't relate to any of my small examples given, you're still going to fall short of God's law. You're going to fail on the first of the 10 Commandments. No one can meet God's standards except Jesus. And that's why he can cleanse us, and only he can do it as the spotless lamb. And I wonder what your response to that is. Does the thought that you need washing cause a reaction at all? Have you gone numb to it over time, perhaps, or have you just never considered the need for it? Does it rub you up the wrong way, or does it ring true? Now, a surgeon's work is to heal people, but his instrument is a knife. And whilst it might hurt to hear that you need cleansing, it does allow you to be cleansed. Elsewhere, Jesus notes, it's not the righteous that need a doctor, but the sick. Can you see your own need for washing? And the challenge that we all have is, are we going to run to this washing like Peter did after his initial recoil, or are we going to run away from it like Judas? Because by the end of the chapter, after his feet are washed, Judas leaves Jesus to go and betray him. And perhaps he doesn't like the idea that he needs to be washed, or simply he can't accept the servant king. But as a result of this foot washing, in verse 11, he is not clean. Now, you might not betray Jesus in a way that puts you down in history as one of the greatest betrayals of all time. And as I was looking up illustrations for this, what comes top when you Google it is Judas. He is the biggest illustration of betrayal there is. And your name isn't going to come up top when we search for it. And it didn't, because I recognized some of the other names. But Jesus is clear that, what does he say? He says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. So I urge you to run to him. But there is another challenge, though, and that hits people who do run to Jesus with plenty of punch. If Jesus is the Lord who serves and the Lord who saves, well, how does he do it? And this leads us to the Lord who shows. So verses 12 to 17. Now, if you're invited to go and meet the king at one of those fancy garden parties or one of those special meals that some people seemingly find themselves invited to, and you found yourself throwing up, you would not expect him to be cleaning up that mess. Of course he doesn't. Like, it's difficult to even imagine, isn't it? I mean, there's interviews from old servants who said he doesn't even put his own toothpaste on his toothbrush. Like, our leaders just don't serve their people in this way. They get served. And I imagine the king, and maybe most of the kings in history, have never cleaned up anything like sick before. They're above it. They're too important. Maybe they're paid too much. Their time is too important. They have a reputation to uphold. We will never see themselves humble themselves in such a way. And if they did, it would probably make the news as something unexpected and very surprising. And in many ways, that makes sense, doesn't it? We wouldn't expect it. But perhaps that's very sad, that we wouldn't expect our king to serve his people in this way, because our King Jesus does show us things differently. And he wants us to understand what he is doing by acting in this strange way. It's strange now, and it was definitely strange then. In verse 12, he explicitly asks his disciples if they get it or not. And what does he say? So let's read those verses again. Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord. And this is well said, for I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do, just as I have done for you. I assure you, a slave is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. So Jesus is clear. He has shown us how to act. If the boss acts this way, then you bet the servants can do it too. If it's not too degrading or difficult for Jesus, then it shouldn't be for his followers. A slave is not greater than his master, and unless you're postman Pat, the messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. Jesus wants us to understand this clearly, that if we follow him, we must follow his example. He has shown us how to do it, and we need to be doing it. But we have a bit of a problem now, don't we? Because if we ought to wash one another's feet, why is it that we don't? Why is it that we don't really see in the New Testament any reference to feet washing, except once in 1 Timothy, and it's certainly not a command? Did the disciples just forget about it? Did it become too much for them? Perhaps if some of you have a bit of a Catholic edge to you, you just think the Pope can do it well on the Thursday before Good Friday when he splashes 12 feet. Maybe I should have brought a towel this morning with a wash basin, and that would have been the best thing I could have done. I wonder what you think about it. I mean, some churches still do foot washing services. Do you do them here? No, I'd assume not, right? But have they just understood it? Are we hypocrites? Is that what it is? Have they just got it? Maybe, but not necessarily, because Jesus said that he must wash us clean before we go and wash others' feet. And that tells us that washing others' feet isn't going to be the thing that saves us. So by all means, go and wash people's feet, but don't mistake the act for earning a place with God. It is not following Jesus' command literally that what he wants us to do, because he cleans us first, and then we're called to act like him. So if Jesus isn't specifically telling us to go and wash feet, what is he telling us to do? And it's to follow what Jesus is really pointing us to. Like the image of the Passover lamb, the image of Jesus stripping down, humiliating himself, serving his people, stooping to the lowest roles of servanthood, getting involved with the dirt of man, of all types of people, even Judas, and washing them clean. Well, it points us to the cross where Jesus will be stripped down again, humiliated again. He will serve his people again. He will stoop to the lowest of the low, and all to get involved again with the dirt of man and all mankind to wash them clean. And we can return to verse 1, because having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the very end. Now, we can't be the Passover lamb for anybody, and we certainly can't die on the cross to save anyone, but we can mirror Jesus' life in his love of others. And that won't be easy. It cost Jesus his life. It cost the disciples their lives, and many other Christians for it. It's going to be a lot harder than washing each other's feet. We could bring in towels, couldn't we? We could do that. But it's going to be harder. And this is the challenge and call for those who consider themselves washed by Jesus. And if you don't believe me, verse 34 and 35 of this chapter make it explicit for us. He says, I give you a new commandment. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you must also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. The disciples will get this later. And while we don't see the New Testament littered with foot washings, we do see commands and things to show that they really understand Jesus' call to love people like he did. 1 John 3:16. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. 1 John 4. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Romans 12. Love one another, outdo one another in showing honor. Galatians 5. The whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. 1 Peter 4. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly. And the classic bit in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. To start to conclude this morning, we see from this passage that Jesus serves as he washes his disciples' feet. He saves as his washing points us to the ultimate cleansing at the cross. And he shows us how to live because of the love he showed us in all of this. It's truly difficult to grasp just how much Jesus has loved us. And oh, that we would spend more time dwelling on his descension all the way down past the dirty feet and to the cross. How much he loves his own. We can remember that amazing love as we set out to love each other this following week, and hopefully longer. If Jesus could show us his service, what can't we do for each other? When would be enough to say, I'm not doing that? Here's the line. That is too costly or too humiliating or too beneath me. Jesus doesn't preach the self-love like the quote from the start. And if he did, he would never have gone to the cross to save you and me. And aren't we glad that he did? He is our example. We can humbly and sacrificially serve others too. We don't have to be like this world and look after ourselves, strike back when we're hurt and upset, say the unkind word, hold on to that grudge, refuse to make the first move, gossip, belittle, slander. Things very easy to do in the workplace, that's for sure. But we can be like our Lord and Savior and humbly love others so that the world might know the humble service that Jesus provides when he washes his disciples' feet, but more importantly, when he dies on the cross for his own. How does Jesus put it a few chapters later? He says, there is no greater love than this, that one should go love yourself. Is that how he finishes that sentence? There is no greater love than this, that one should go love themselves. No, of course not. He puts it, there is no greater love than this, that one should lay down his life for his friends. So I pray that we do this more and more. Heavenly Father, thank you for this passage and this look into Jesus last evening with his disciples. By your Spirit, would we all understand this more? Would you bless us as Jesus promises to in verse 17, as you enable us to understand this? Help us to love others in a way that is as Christ-like as possible. Help us to be so radical in this that the world would notice and see Jesus. Forgive us for when we fall for the lies of this world and seek our kingdom rather than yours. Thank you that Jesus descended to serve us, to save us, and to show us how to live for your glory and our good. Thank you for our servant King. Amen.